arts-based experts who deal with programs and approaches that have been used around the world to open pathways to understanding and communication between peoples. The arts mitigate the effects of stress and trauma and are known to facilitate innovative spaces for emotional release. Tonight, we will be interviewing Dr. Mitchell Kozak, who is a professor in expressive therapies and a fellow in the Institute for Arts and Health at Lesley University. And he has just published a new book entitled Attunement in Expressive Arts Therapy. Dr. Kozak is the chairperson and executive co-chair of the International Expressive Arts Therapy Association, IADR, and he's worked both regionally and internationally with programs and approaches that have used the arts to mitigate the effects of stress and trauma. I wanted to begin our interview tonight by reading a poem from Nikki Giovanni, and the program is called The Drum. The drum. Daddy says the world is a drum, tight and hard, and I told him I'm going to beat out my own rhythm. So, Dr. Kozak, if we're all beating out our own rhythms, tell me how it is that you have come to understand the work of attuning to other people's rhythms, and a little bit about your own journey with the work.
Sure. Thanks for having me. And so rhythm started for me at an early age. I was about 5 years old, and I was sitting under our family piano, listening to my father, who decided he was going to take piano lessons. And I would sit under the piano and absorb these sounds and, in a sense, these rhythms, which I later, in graduate school and postgraduate school, I learned that the world is made up of rhythm. There's rhythm in our bodies. We have our nervous system has a rhythm, our heartbeats, we have cranial rhythms. The universe has a certain rhythm to it. We have influences on nature with the moon and so forth. So I've been a musician most of my life, and I came to realize sometime into my musicianship that rhythm was important, but even more important was the sense of embodiment, the sense of I am an embodied being, and when I play music, I play piano and I play some drums, that when I play, that there's this sense of rhythm that I have to be in tune with. I think we've all had this experience of being moved through music, that if we hear a certain music that we like, there's a certain energy there, and we start to, naturally just start to move.
And there's a contagious effect. Whatever it is that we begin to feel in a community, the community itself begins to feel?
Well, so in my work, as Vivian said earlier, I went to school to study expressive arts therapy, and then became a licensed mental health counselor, and I work with individuals and communities. And in my work with communities, I found that there's a certain rhythmic awareness that I need to be in touch with in order to be attuned in a way, in order to connect with what's happening in that community. And this really became profound for me when I was working with an autistic community. We had a research project at Lesley for autistic adults, and we would bring autistic adults into a studio space and do music and movement with them, and they would bring their aides with them, and we had graduate students as part of this project. And the thing that I became interested in, besides singing songs with them and playing instruments and having fun, I was really interested in improvisation, because I'm an improvisational musician. I'm trained as a jazz musician, and I play all kinds of improvisational music. And so I started to experiment with bringing these autistic adults with their aides and myself and some of the students together in small circles of trios and quartets, and just start to improvise together. And I started to get amazed at what happened in these circles, what started to happen where these seemingly individuals who couldn't connect suddenly were connecting so profoundly, connecting in ways that I had experience with in professional musical circles. And I started to see, I started to think, what if this is happening here? What's going on? So I don't know. I have a small clip. Should I show us a small clip of this? Okay. Let's see if I can cue this in. So this is one of the sessions that we had, and you can see the circle.
It's okay, Peter. Leave it.
And this is just the beginning of it. I don't know if we'll have time to see the whole thing. But you get the idea that we were in the middle together and making music together. So they pass out instruments. You could see later on, this guy particularly, who just got the sticks, would really get into the rhythm of it. I named this rhythm and regulation because he would get overly excited as part of what he lives with. And then the rhythm of the group, though, would hold him in this, bring him back to the group energy. So I'm just going to cut it back here.
I think that clip you just showed us really captures what you're talking about when you say in page 30 on your book. In expressive arts, we are trying to tap into or tune into that collective flow of creative intelligence as a way of not only understanding ourselves, but also placing our personal within the larger frame of the interpersonal or collective world we live in. So talk to me a little bit about the work that you've done with the collective attunement, the collective energies of the groups you've been working with.
So, first of all, I'm reminded when you read that I'm not going to get the quote exactly, but something that Picasso said, I think, is that he wished he could always get back to that childlike energy that he had. Because, we know that children naturally play, and they naturally are creative. They tap into that creative energy, which is a kind of flow, sometimes people say, and the sense of when you get into this flowing state, you kind of get lost. And we know from lots of research that's been done recently, especially with trauma and with other situations that people live with, that when we get into these flow states, neurological changes happen, healing energy starts to flow in the body, and it's very healing. And so I'm going to switch to a slide. Right after the marathon bombing, you probably know that there was a memorial down at Copley Plaza. And around the corner from Copley Plaza is Emmanuel Church. And they invited me to come and facilitate, along with some other Lesley faculty and students, to facilitate a day of healing. And we called it When Words Are Not Enough. And I had this idea of how can we address the community healing and what we would call a misattunement that happened to the whole community. The whole community was in shock. The whole community still is in somewhat shock. And we realized that talking about it in our work that we do is not enough, that we have to do other things. So we came up with this idea, when words are not enough. And I took off of the idea of Tibetan prayer flags. And Tibetan prayer flags are traditionally made and they're hung up, and the prayers that are made fly out into the wind, out into the community. So it's a symbolic, metaphoric act. So we created this this day where the church doors were open, and we let the community come in and make these prayer flags, and then we hung them outside the church, as you can see here. And we had over probably 200 people that came by that day. And this was one of the flags that were made, and you can see that someone said, "Now everything has changed except the way men think." Albert Einstein, after the first atomic bomb was successfully detonated in 1945. We must change. the way we think and act in resolving conflict, or we're finished, as the finish line of the marathon there. So some people got very creative. And then we marched over to Copley Square and we hung these flags at the Copley Memorial. So this was just one day that we had together. We also did some work in the Boston community at some churches afterwards based on resiliency, where we introduced some discussion groups, but also some music and some movement that we did with the groups. So that was one of the ways that we've done this.
And I know that in your work that you both talk about and lecture about and use in your work the notion of misattunement,
Yeah.
and how when things are out of alignment, how it's then in these moments of more disturbing and darker kinds of happenings and images, that how the arts can be used in those situations to begin to build safety and to begin to build trust.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about that kind of work that I know you've done both in this country and abroad?
Sure. Let me first say that attunement, what is attunement? You know, attunement has been said to be a kind of felt feeling, deep feeling sense that I understand, that I get what's happening in this moment with you or with others in a space. And it's like, I'm going to switch to a slide here, it's like two tuning forks. So this is if two people, we can multiply this by many people, are in a space together. And one, if we know that if one tuning fork is struck, it sends out a vibrational wave in the space, and people can hear it, and then they start to connect. Or they don't connect. So we might have a situation where people connect, or they don't connect. We've all had this situation before. And we know that this is somewhat based on mirror neurons, neurology that's coming to our attention these days, where the work with these young monkeys, where the researcher sticks his tongue out, and then the monkey sticks his tongue out. So let's see, the other way. So we know this happens in humans, but this mostly happens, oh, that's the other slide. Sorry. We know that, this happens developmentally between caretakers, mothers and child and young infants. There's a kind of biological tuning in system. Mm-hmm. So in my research, what I began to realize is that this is the exact same thing that happens when people make art together. Whether somebody makes a visual piece of art and you just see it and then you start to connect with it, and you actually, the studies have shown that people kind of take on this energy. But we also know that this happens in group settings, in families, that we take on the energy. Now sometimes the energy, the feelings, the emotional atmosphere is not healthy. Sometimes it's traumatizing. And so we take on that trauma as well inside our bodies. And so engaging in the arts, what I found, and I'm going to show some other examples here where I've done some work, engaging in rhythm circles with drums, engaging in movement, which you do. Vivian's a dance therapist. And so engaging in these practices helps to find more creative or creative ways to address what we're working with. And if it happens to be trauma, that's where it becomes important.
And in these moments of us talking to each other,
yes,
we begin to reflect back to each other's movements.
Yes.
This is how we human beings communicate with each other,
mm-hmm.
rhythmically, beginning to attune ourselves. And even in simple conversations, we begin to attune ourselves to each other.
Yeah.
You want to talk some more about the other kinds of populations you've worked with?
Sure. So let me talk, because I know our time is short here. We're going to run out of time soon. So one project we did, this was back in 2009, was part of an international conference we held at Lesley University, part of the International Expressive Arts Therapy Association, in partnership with Lesley. And the theme of the conference was arts and social action. How can we put this out into communities. So we decided we were going to create a community-based social action project. So we asked for volunteers, and to our surprise, we had over 100 people that wanted to participate in this. And these were people who were, we called it creating peace art zones in the community. And we had over 100 artists, art educators, and art therapists. And we invited 6 youth groups to come to Lesley. And we asked them the question, what does peace mean to you? And we created these silhouettes, as you can see up here on the screen. This is one example, this collage of silhouettes. And we taught some songs. And then these youth groups, the next day, so we were training them. They went out into the community. You can see here we're teaching, these are the youth groups. We're teaching them some songs about peace and about community to kind of stimulate some ideas and to attune and to get them rhythmically attuned. And then these youth groups went out to 6 elderly housing communities, some nursing homes, some assisted living places, and just some elderly housing communities. And they asked the elderly to do the same exact thing. They taught them the songs. They asked them, what does peace mean to you? And this was one of the songs that it's a little, I think, blurry, but this was one of the songs that we sang. And actually, I sang the song at the Copley Memorial as well. And we went out into the community. Oh, you want me to sing the song? Okay. Vivian's asking me to sing the song. Okay. I'm going to sing it briefly, but this is the song that we sang. And we sang this at the Copley Memorial as well. It's an old spiritual that was actually taught to me by, we lost it. Let's see if we can get this back. Here we are. It was taught to me by one of my colleagues, Karen Estrella, at Lesley University. And the song is, nobody's going to take my peace from me. And we can substitute the word peace with hope, faith, whatever it is. And the song goes something like this. Nobody's going to take my peace from me, no, 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 no. Nobody's gonna take my peace from me, no, 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 no. Say nobody's gonna take my peace from me, no fear, no greed, no jealousy. Nobody's gonna take my peace from me, no, 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 no. May my eyes be bright, may my heart be light. May my hands be filled with grace. When the shadows fall, may I light them all. May I smile in trouble's face. May I smile in trouble's face. So we sang that song, and it's not going to move. So anyway.
Thank you, Mitchell.
We sang that song, and the youth groups asked the elderly about what does peace mean to them, and then we came back and we created an installation back at Lesley with these 100 collages. So it was very successful.
It's an incredible example of how you can do intergenerational work, and how when a community needs healing, how involving all of the generations in the work of healing is so important. Let's move on a little bit to some of the international work that you've done, since
Okay.
this work translates all around the world, and I know you've been all around the world doing the work.
Yeah. So I've done this work in a lot of places. I was in Hong Kong a couple of years ago. I've been in Japan. I've been in Guatemala. I was in Peru. I was in Northern Ireland. I had some slides, but they're not working right now. So let me tell you a little bit about the work we did in Northern Ireland. And this was part of a conference on peace and reconciliation. It was a conference on spirituality and healing. And I came there to do my work on attunement and rhythm. And there was a couple of 100 people in the audience, a lot from the people doing the work in Northern Ireland and peace and reconciliation. There were people from South Africa, where you're from, who came to talk about the work there. And there were a lot of clergy, there were a lot of politicians, there were a lot of mental health workers. And And I came with a suitcase full of instruments, and they started the show off by showing a BBC movie of what they call the Troubles, and the Troubles are violent, and they showed a lot of violence in this. They warned us, and a lot of people they're still traumatized there, and they got re-traumatized. And it came my time to do my workshop, and I wasn't sure how I was going to approach this because this is not a community that I'm familiar with or that I work with. But I've been doing this work in many different cultures, including here in Cambridge. And I took out my instruments and I did what I usually do, and I said, let's just start to beat out a rhythm and see what happens. And there was about 25 of us in a circle, and there was this one elderly nun, very conservative looking. I didn't think she was really going to get into doing this, but she picked up an instrument and we started to drum. And I started to drum, and people came in, and we got about 10 minutes into it, and I looked up, and I saw this woman, and she was shaking a shaker. She had a couple of shakers, and she was really shaking like this. And then we stopped, and then I said to everybody, "How was that? How did that go for everybody?" And there was kind of a silence there, and then she raised her hand very kind of meekly, but she said, "I've been holding on to tension in my body and trauma, really, for about 20 years. And she said, I felt like something released for me. And I felt like that was it. That was a testament to what this work can really do and how it can really affect people deeply." So that was just one example that I like to tell that story because it's so poignant. It was such a beautiful moment, and it really opened up other people to talk about. It really opens up moments for people then to start talking about, because when you're in this state of making art, or the art brings up things inside of people in ways that just talking just can't do.
And I know over many, many years of doing conferences together with you in this country and in Israel as well, that I've seen you in action when you use music with a whole community as a way of bringing the community together, and as a way of being able to bring the community into some sort of common rhythms. And I know you've worked for many years also with Dancers of Universal Peace, and I've seen you leading these dancers on Universal Peace here, there, and everywhere. Do you want to talk a little bit about the work that you did in Israel and the work that we did together around the Imagine conference?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up a slide here.
Okay.
So why don't you say a little bit about the Imagine conference while I'm trying to pick up this slide.
So the Imagine conference was a conference which we held in Israel in 2006. And we brought together Israelis and Palestinians in a conference called Imagine, Expression in the Service of Humanity. And it was really about developing creative approaches to working with conflict in groups. And I know you're about to bring up the slide of the images of you doing Dances of Universal Peace with some of the group. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that work.
Sure. So this is a group of Palestinians and Israelis at this conference. And the work of Dances of Universal Peace, while I'm not, I've been involved with them. It's a local group here that meets first Friday of the month at the Friends Meeting House in Cambridge, and the third Saturday. And these are dances and chants from all spiritual traditions from around the world. And I'm not fully trained in this, but I've utilized some of the chants that they've taught me over many years, and they're very powerful. And working with this group, I wasn't sure how it was going to come together, because I chose to use some Israeli songs and some Arabic songs that talked about Allah, and I didn't know how it would go over, but it was you were part of that group, so. It was very interesting and very intense. I think it brought people together in a way that, many times at that conference people tried to talk to each other, and it got into heated debates about who's right and who's wrong. And in these songs, nobody's right or wrong. It's just us together creating sounds, creating movement, and they call this embodied prayer. The dances of universal peace are embodied prayer. So that's one of the examples from that. Yeah.
And I know that you've done work with expressive arts therapy in Hong Kong as well.
Yeah.
You want to talk about what it was like working in that culture?
So this was in Hong Kong with my colleagues Karen Estrella and Julia Byers, and we were invited to this conference. It was part of a mental health symposium at this psychiatric hospital. And interestingly, we did a full-day workshop, and then we had a conference. And interestingly, I find, there are cultural specifics in each place that people have lived and that they tune into. And it's part of my job that I have to tune into what that reality is for them. Even though I don't know the whole history and I don't know there's a kind of feeling that I get. So even when I started to do some chants, and I do some improvisational chanting usually in my work while people move, and then they draw and paint to that. As a way to express what's happening. So even then I'm tapping into some wisdom that's coming through in the moment. And yeah.
I think that a lot of our work draws on ancient, almost shamanic roots of how it is that people in all communities.
I came to